Doug
literally
McClure.
about a year
Here's a
before I
question
was on
for
the
you.
dole.
What happens when the whole world
living
falls
on
in love
25
with the
pounds a
character
week?
you play,
You've seen the skit
and then can't
of,
let
who
you
is it,
be
Rick
anyone
Moranis,
else?
I think?
That's the story of a
Plays
man
you.
who became one of the most recognizable faces on American television, only to spend the rest of his life trying to prove there was more to him than one unforgettable cowboy hat. He had the smile, the charm, and that easy, rugged confidence that made you feel like everything was going to turn out fine. For 9 straight years, he rode into American living rooms every single week, and audiences adored him for it. But strip away the sunny screen presence, and you'll find a life that was a lot messier than the character suggested. 5 marriages, 4 divorces, a brutal fight to be seen as more than a TV cowboy,
Amazing.
and in the
Listen to
end,
the vocal line.
a battle with cancer that took him far too soon, at just 59 years old. So how did a kid who grew up surfing and riding horses in Southern California end up as one of the defining faces of the Western genre, and then spend decades trying to escape that very shadow? Let's get into it. He was born Douglas Osborne McClure on May 11, 1935, in Glendale, California, to a fairly ordinary middle-class family with English and Irish roots. His dad crunched numbers as an accountant, his mom wrote for a local paper, and he had an older brother to grow up alongside. Nothing dramatic, nothing tragic, just a stable childhood during a stretch when California itself was booming after the Depression. The family eventually settled in West Los Angeles, and young Doug came up going to Palisades Elementary and then University High School, surrounded by sunshine, ocean air, and all the outdoor living that Southern California is famous for. Even as a kid, he wasn't the type to sit still indoors. He found his real passion early: horses. He learned to ride while still in elementary school and never really stopped. By high school, he owned his own horse and spent nearly all his free time on it. Looking at his later career, it's almost impossible to separate the man from the cowboy image. But here's the thing: that love affair with horses started years before he ever set foot on a film set. It wasn't an act. It was just who he was. And it wasn't only horses. This was a kid who played football, played basketball, surfed whenever he got the chance. The classic California all-rounder. His days revolved around fields, beaches, and open air, way more than stages or spotlights. And that's exactly what built the strong, natural physical presence audiences would eventually see on their screens. One experience really stuck with him. In his last year of high school, he spent 3 months working at a massive cattle ranch in Nevada. For most California teenagers back then, the Wild West was something you saw in movies or read about in books. For him, it became something real. Early mornings before sunrise, hands-on ranch work, a life dictated by weather and livestock instead of scripts. Years later, when he stepped into cowboy roles, he wasn't faking it. He'd actually lived it. After graduating in 1954, he enrolled at Santa Monica City College and started dipping his toes into acting through drama classes, though he wasn't fully sold on show business as a career. He hedged his bets by continuing at UCLA, studying physical education as a backup plan in case acting didn't pan out. Unlike a lot of young hopefuls who threw everything at Hollywood with nothing to fall back on, he always kept a safety net. His good looks landed him modeling gigs and commercial work during college. And slowly but surely, those small opportunities pulled him closer into the entertainment world. From ads, he moved into bit parts on television. Nothing flashy, but enough to open a door that would eventually change his entire life. In those early years, nobody was exactly clamoring for his autograph. His path looked a lot like every other young actor grinding through 1950s Hollywood. Small roles, brief appearances, a lot of patience. What set him apart was that he never seemed to be racing the clock. He treated acting like a craft you build brick by brick, not a lottery ticket you're hoping to win overnight. Through the mid-1950s, he kept popping up in various shows. A Naval Academy drama called Men of Annapolis, then Death Valley Days, Maverick, and a memorable episode of The Twilight Zone. Nobody knew his name yet, but producers were starting to notice something: a natural, easygoing screen presence that audiences responded to. His first real break came in 1957, With the Enemy Below, a World War II submarine thriller starring Robert Mitchum. His role was small, tucked under Mitchum's command, but sharing a set with major stars gave him experience no television gig could match. Filming that project in Hawaii also changed his personal life. That's where he met opera singer Faye Brasher, who would become his first wife. Professionally, the film gave him real visibility inside the studio system for the first time. He wasn't just a passing face on the small screen anymore. Through the late 50s and early 60s, he kept stacking up film credits. Gidget, which captured that era's California youth culture, and Because They're Young, where he worked alongside Robert Shaw, a name that would matter again very soon. Then in 1960 came his biggest project yet, The Unforgiven, directed by John Huston, starring heavyweights like Burt Lancaster and Audrey Hepburn. He wasn't a lead, but sharing a set with legends taught him plenty about the craft, and about how massive productions actually run. Television, though, is where his real opportunity showed up. In 1960, he landed a starring role in NBC's Overland Trail, playing sidekick to William Bendix. The show only lasted 17 episodes before getting canceled, but it proved something important. He could carry a regular spot in a national series. Executives started to see him as a natural fit for the Western boom sweeping American television. Almost immediately after that show folded, he landed another lead role, this time in CBS's Checkmate, playing a young investigator for roughly 70 episodes between 1960 and 1962. This mattered because it proved he wasn't just a cowboy type. He could pull off a modern, energetic character just as easily. Then, in early 1962, everything changed. Universal was casting a new Western series called The Virginian, and he was called in to read for a character named Trampas. As the story goes, his wife at the time believed he was up against a pile of other actors, a classic studio trick to build leverage before contract talks. When she asked who else was in the running, he told her, "Nobody." Whether or not that story is exactly true, one thing isn't in question. He got the part, and it changed everything. Here's something interesting. In the original novel, Trampas was actually the villain, but the TV writers reshaped him into something completely different. A mischievous, funny, slightly rebellious cowboy who was impossible not to like. And a huge part of that transformation came from the actor himself. His natural humor, his easy charm, his real history with horses, all of it bled into the character, until you couldn't tell where the writing ended and the man began. The Virginian premiered on NBC in September 1962, and right from the start, it stood apart from other westerns of the era. Most shows ran 30 or 60 minutes. This one ran a full 90 minutes, practically a theatrical film every single week. Universal poured serious money into it, hoping to build one of NBC's flagship programs. Nobody could have guessed just how much that gamble would define one actor's entire career. At first, Trampas wasn't even the centerpiece. That honor belonged to the title character, played by James Drury, and to Judge Garth, played by Lee J. Cobb. But audiences responded to Trampas in a big way. Fan mail piled up. Writers kept expanding his storylines, season after season. While the Virginian represented steady, principled cowboy values, Trampas brought something messier and more human. He made mistakes, he got into trouble, he stumbled. And that imperfection is exactly what made people fall for him. Naturally, the show's ambition meant brutal hours. Long days on the studio lot, constant movement between outdoor locations and sound stages. Months eaten up by production. Even with all that, he squeezed in film work too. Shenandoah with James Stewart in 1965, and Beau Geste the following year. But the bulk of his time and energy went straight into Trampas. One of the best things to come out of the show wasn't professional at all. It was the friendship he built with co-star James Drury. The two hit it off immediately, and stayed close for the rest of their lives, reportedly talking on the phone several times a week for decades. Drury always said his friend was basically the same person off-screen as on. Warm, funny, and full of positive energy. Over its 9 seasons, the show cycled through cast changes. Robert Shaw left to get married. Lee J. Cobb exited unexpectedly in 1966, but through it all, Trampas stayed put. He became the connective tissue holding the series together through every shift, which is a big reason he became one of the most familiar faces on American television throughout the 60s. When the show finally wrapped in 1971, after 9 seasons and 249 episodes, he and Drury were the only 2 actors who'd been there for the entire run. He was only 36 years old when it ended, young enough, in theory, to chase something bigger. But here's the catch. Nearly a decade of being one character makes it awfully hard to convince the world you're someone else. The years right after were rough. Universal tried to build him a new vehicle, pairing him with the legendary Bette Davis in The Judge and Jake Weiler, but the pilot underperformed, and it never became a series. He pivoted to a science fiction detective show called Search in 1972, sharing lead duties with other actors. It got some decent buzz, but folded after 2 short seasons. This was a familiar trap for TV stars of that era. Audiences loved the character, but weren't always ready to accept the same actor in something totally different.
Living on 25
he wasn't
pounds
unique
a week.
in facing that wall, but he handled it without turning bitter. Instead of chasing another Trampas-sized hit, he found a new lane entirely. Mid-budget fantasy adventure films, many based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories. The Land That Time Forgot in 1974. At the Earth's Core alongside Peter Cushing in 1976. The People That Time Forgot in 1977. Warlords of Atlantis in 1978. None of these turned him into a box office giant, but they kept him working, kept him visible, and years later became genuine cult favorites for a new set of fans. He kept busy on television too, showing up in Barbary Coast, the acclaimed miniseries Roots, and guest spots across Fantasy Island, Airwolf, Murder, She Wrote, The Fall Guy, and more throughout the late 70s and 80s. He wasn't headlining anymore, but he was never out of work either. Producers trusted him. He was reliable, professional, and easy to work with, qualities that keep an actor employed long after the spotlight moves on. In the late 1980s, he found one more real hit, the sitcom Out of This World, where he played a small-town mayor turned sheriff from 1987 to 1991. It introduced him to a whole new, younger audience who had no idea who Trampas even was. He once joked, with his usual sense of humor, that he had the feeling everyone assumed he was dead. He wasn't complaining, he'd simply never stopped working, even if the public wasn't paying as much attention as they once had. Into the early 90s, he kept going. He reunited with James Drury for a Western TV movie, took a small nostalgic role in the 1994 Maverick film alongside Mel Gibson, and kept accepting projects right up until the end, including one completed while he was already battling cancer, and released only after his death. Now, his personal life. It wasn't loud or scandal-driven the way so many Hollywood stories are. But behind that easy on-screen smile was a man who went through 5 marriages and 4 divorces across roughly 4 decades of adulthood, constantly starting over when plans didn't hold together the way he'd hoped. His first wife was that opera singer he met in Hawaii, and their marriage produced his first daughter before ending in 1961. Not long after, he met actress Barbara Luna while filming Overland Trail, and they married in late 1961, right before his career exploded with the Trampas role. Fame, though, brought distance, and that marriage ended in 1963. Still, decades later, Luna spoke of him with warmth rather than resentment. He married again in 1965, during the peak years of the Western's success, but that union ended a few years later. His fourth marriage, to Diane Soldani, lasted 9 years, and produced his second daughter, his longest relationship up to that point, before ending in 1979. And then, while working in England, he met Diane Fernberg. They married in 1979 and stayed together until his death in 1995, 16 years, by far his most enduring relationship, and the one that carried him through his final chapter. Despite all the upheaval in his romantic life, he stayed present as a father. One daughter went on to work in entertainment herself, The other chose a quieter, more private path. Those who knew him said he always made an effort to stay close with his kids, no matter how packed his schedule got. He also faced quieter personal losses. His father passed away in 1965, right in the middle of the show's most successful run, a private grief tucked behind a very public high point. In early 1994, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Nearly 40 years into his career, he didn't slow down. He kept accepting roles, kept showing up on set, refusing to let illness rewrite his identity from actor to patient. In the middle of treatment, he received one of the great honors of his life, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in November 1994. Friends said it meant the world to him, like a fitting final bow on a lifetime in the business. He kept working almost to the very end, filming in Hawaii when he collapsed on set. Doctors initially suspected a stroke or heart trouble, but tests revealed the cancer had spread to his liver and bones. On February 5, 1995, he passed away in Sherman Oaks, California, at just 59 years old, only months shy of his 60th birthday. He was laid to rest in Santa Monica. His death hit colleagues and longtime fans hard, not just because a familiar face was gone, but because the industry had lost someone genuinely well-liked. Tributes at the time leaned just as much on his humor and warmth as they did on his famous roles. So here's the real takeaway from all of this. This was a man who found massive, defining success fairly early in life, and then spent most of the rest of his career figuring out how to live in the shadow of it. Broken marriages, career setbacks, the strange loneliness of being loved for a character instead of yourself.
Living on £25 a week.
And yet the people who actually knew him kept saying the same thing. He stayed warm. He stayed funny. He stayed optimistic, even when life didn't go according to plan. Maybe that's exactly why, decades later, thinking about him feels more like warmth than sadness. Every time an old rerun plays, and a new viewer stumbles onto that grinning cowboy for the first time, he's still right there. Not some distant legend, but a familiar face, from an era plenty of people still remember fondly. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor. Drop a like, leave a comment with your favorite role of his, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. There are so many more forgotten legends worth talking about, and I'd love to have you along for the next one.